Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream. I'm late, and I admit it's my fault. I was watching Doc Disrespect on YouTube streaming Escape from Tarkov, which doesn't happen all day, every day. Sorry. It's going to happen all day today, but got to record a podcast now, and I'm drinking coffee because it's one of these days. I've been up since like 6 o'clock working. Yeah. What can you do? Anyway, we're gonna do this show now. Private Citizen, as usual, podcast ground rules. I won't be engaging with chat as much as I do when I say do game streams. But of course, I'm watching chat, and I always appreciate feedback, so I might actually talk about what you're saying. Tarkov will ruin my life. I think it, just don't remind me. What the fuck? Everything. It's bad enough. Everything is. It's touch and go right now. Not only Tarkov. Everything's just too much to do, and I don't have time. And it's just too much going on, privately and work. But tomorrow I will promise this for Monday, and I could do this on Monday. But tomorrow I will do this. I will take a day off, even though I should be writing. And from about 2 in the afternoon, CET, I'll be building this Blue Bricks set. If I can get like enough space on my desk, which will be an issue, because I mean as you can see what this looks like. But I'll try, and I'll just take that half that day off and do that, because I want to. Anyway, let's get this podcast on the road. Today, I'm trying once again to stop talking about the coronavirus, which means I'm gonna have to talk about the coronavirus. Hopefully, one last time for a while. I'm gonna try. Can't do more than try. Tried this before. A year and a half ago, it didn't work, so might as well try again. Testing the recording. This is a test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tried this before. A year and a half ago, it didn't work, so might as well try again. Testing the recording. This is a test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, at least that seems to work. Right, I think we should get right into it. I'm just going to record the show, and then I'm going to bugger off and edit it offline. I'll hand you over to some other streamer. I'll edit the show, put it up, and then I'm going to do some more writing into the night, I think. So let's get this show on the road, shall we? See if I can manage to do this once again for the 106th time. You're listening to The Private Citizen. This is episode 106 for Wednesday, the 19th of January 2022. Concluding the coronavirus coverage, part 2. Hello everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Fab. I'm coming to you live from Düsseldorf in Germany. I think my mic has too much gain. And I'll be trying to fix that. That should be okay. Turning this knob. Hey, how are you doing? Welcome to the show. Nice to have you. Today's show topic it's labeled part 2, but you might, maybe if you've been listening to the show for a long time, you might remember part 1, which was, a year and a half ago, where I tried to stop talking about the pandemic. For other reasons than I'm trying to today, but that completely failed. I'm trying again today, so what I will try to do, I will try to explain to you why I think more coverage doesn't really help anybody right now. And also, of course, I'm also gonna recap a little bit like what happened, why I talked about so much on the show and on all of that. And now I'm gonna move on. Well, I'm gonna try to, and then we'll have some more interesting topic. I mean, not that it's not interesting, but I'll get to that. We'll hopefully have some other topics here in the future. While I'm talking about the future, I'll have to mention once again that there won't be any episodes of the show in February, as I'm taking February off completely, because I'm trying to finish my novel, and I really have to. I'm trying. All right. So I also want to do a podcast. So I realized there's only one more show scheduled next week. Before I do that, I'll try to do maybe an extra show beforehand, but I can't promise anything because next week's already completely full. There's so much other stuff I have to do. It's kind of like holiday when you take, when you say you're gonna take a month off or something, then you have to like finish all this other crap. And I kind of thought this only happened to you when you worked in an office, but it's when you work for yourself, it's kind of just for a company. I mean, of course, I still work in an office. I mean, if you can call this man cave an office, if I look up, I got the Rocinante flying over me, so I don't know how much of an office that is, but anyway, now I work for myself. It's still the same thing. Still have to finish all this stuff up. But I'll try to get 2 more episodes out, but at least 1, and then I'll take February off, and I'm gonna make up the lost shows for you as always, because when I started the show I promised an episode a week, not specifically every week, but on average, and so far I've kept that promise, and I will try to will endeavor to keeping it. I don't know. Right, and with that, let's get to the topic of the day here. So, obviously, I started this podcast. Oh God, why can't I remember this offhand? Well, if you go to privatecitizen.press, as I always say, there are ample show notes for all the shows. There's a listing for all the episodes. I mean, there will be show notes for this episode. And episode 1 was on the 5th of February. So February 2020, I started this show. And then, aiming mostly to, I was aiming for this to be a privacy show, right? But also combined with a little bit of politics because, or privacy. I'm trying to talk Queen's English here. I don't like these, I've done this in the past, right? I don't like these podcasts that are too much centered on one topic. I didn't want to do a pure privacy show because, I've made the experience in the past that, I was on a show did a show with a co-host called Linux Outlaws. And it was specifically very much about Linux and open source. We also talked about other stuff, but we tried to keep it on that topic mostly. And if you do something like this, if you do a show that's centered on a topic like this, really good for kind of, for lack of a better word, PR, right? It's really easy to get people in there to, to come listen to your show, and they immediately understand what your show is about, and they kind of can identify with it. It's kind of, it's a little bit kind of like tribalism. It's like podcast tribalism, whatever. It's like, people know what their hobby is, and then you do a show about that, and then you basically put yourself into that niche. That is good to get listeners, but I feel it's somewhat detrimental to the show. And we noticed this on LO, or at least I did when it moved on. When we were doing it for a long time, because you'd have people that were like, but you're a Linux guy, how can you have a PlayStation or whatever, right? There's all these stereotypes attached to it. And I also feel like you kind of we never fell into this with Linux Outlaws, but I've noticed this on a lot of other shows, especially privacy shows. People like pigeonhole themselves. They pigeonhole their thinking, right? They do a privacy show and then they only think about that. In German, it's even worse because in Germany, like a German podcast, because we don't have the word privacy, we call it Datenschutz, which is a dumb term, really. It's data protection, and it's the wrong term because privacy implies that you know what it's about. It's about keeping your private stuff private. It's about you, right? And when it comes to digital stuff, your data. Data protection sounds like you're protecting the data. It sounds like it's about the data. And you know how like language forms understanding of the world sometimes? That's how a lot of Germans that are very into this think as well. But anyway, so people pigeonhole themselves. And I noticed this on a lot of podcasts, especially German Datenschutz, data privacy podcasts. When they see everything just from this privacy kind of standpoint, right? And that is that can be a problem. That leaves out that you lose kind of sight of the big picture. So I always wanted the show to also be like, for example, politics focused, because if you're thinking about privacy, you are basically thinking about civil rights as well, like freedoms. Privacy is like kind of a freedom for you, right? You have the right to keep something. You have the right to have something to hide, as I like to call it, and that is it's well and good to fight for that, but it's like if you only focus on that and you just ignore your other civil rights that get impinged on, maybe, for example, then it can be very counterproductive. And I kind of felt like this, and this is why, this show was born out of an impetus. When we stopped doing Linux Outlaws, at the end I felt more and more that software freedom, while it is very important, is actually not as important as other things. And I talked about this on OggCamp, at OggCamp 19, when events were still happening. I was on stage with Dan, and we talked a little bit about Linux Outlaws and what we've done since then. And that's when I at that time I started developing the idea for this show. And back then I called it Datensparsamkeit Outlaws, which Datensparsamkeit is kind of a German neologism that means, we talked about this on the show before as well, being frugal with your data, think about what you upload kind of thing. And I basically said, I feel like the next, basically if you think about your freedom as a human being, as a person in a state, then the next battleground for me, and we're talking end of 2019, was privacy. And I felt like that software freedom, while important, really, for me, took a backseat to that, because I've been writing about all these issues as well as a journalist, and you notice people, for example, when Android came out, people were very happy that it was Linux based, and while there are issues with software freedom, you have a lot of free software on there and whatever, but they're people who only care about software freedom for a large part were completely blindsided to the fact that Google with Android basically established this surveillance capitalism model, and they could have given you all your software completely free software. They still kind of own all your data, and that is where their money comes from, right? And to me, these days, that is actually the bigger issue. Anyway, so I was thinking about the show. we were starting with this, and then the pandemic hit, and of course, it was kind of fortuitous that I just started a privacy podcast, because this SARS-CoV-2 pandemic has been the absolute, in German we like to say Super-GAU. A GAU is a GAU, the größter anzunehmender Unfall. It's a term from nuclear power plants. Chernobyl was a GAU. the largest imaginable catastrophe, basically. And then, because that isn't bad enough, you can have a super-GAU, which is the super largest, imaginable catastrophe. And it's kind of beyond what you would imagine, basically. And this is what happened. I mean, that's what happened, I feel, to our freedoms, to our civil rights, as you know. I think almost, and amazingly, there's something I would have never imagined, almost all over the world, no matter where you are. If you live in a modern democracy, you might be listening to this in the UK, in the US, in Germany, in the Netherlands, maybe even in India or in Australia. I mean, this happened all over the planet, Russia, everywhere. If you are not living in a democratic republic, let's say, or constitutional monarchy or something like that, and let's say you are listening to this from China, then of course, okay, all bets are off, right? I mean, your life changed probably as much as our life over here changed, but you didn't really. I mean, you were already living in a totalitarian state. There was no, there was really not the assumption of these rights from the beginning. That doesn't excuse it, but it's like, and of course there was way worse restrictions of civil liberties during the pandemic, let's say in China, but it's somewhat more expected, I would think. But anyway, over here, I would have never expected this to happen like that and on this scale, and especially not, sometimes I think humans are often naive. And I certainly was naive in this, because if somebody should have expected this kind of thing, then somebody like me, I don't have a university degree, but I spent years and years in university studying politics and history, and especially modern history, the Third Reich, the era before World War I and World War II, the interwar era, all this kind of stuff, where basically that is the best preparation for understanding how I feel like in hindsight it should have been a good preparation to understanding what happened here. I think people think it's populism to compare what has happened to us over the last 2 years to what has happened in the interwar period in Germany, for example. And it's of course very different, but I don't think, I think it's an sometimes people, it's like you compare something, and I mean this is how a lot of, I feel, a lot of historic science works. You need to compare things that have happened before. Like if you wanna use historic science to understand something that's happening today, right? If you want to divorce it from a purely academical subject that you're just doing because, I don't know, you got nothing better to do, and you want to use it to understand your life, then you have to apply it to today. And with that, it always brings a comparison. And there's a very famous case in German historical science, which we have talked about on the show before. Yevgeny, actually from Russia, chimed in on this. So in Germany, there was the famous thing, what's this, 70s, 80s, I think, or might have even been started in the 60s, but it was called the Historikerstreit, the Battle of the Historians, where there were basically in historical science and people looking at Nazi Germany and the World War II, there were two camps. And one camp said that what the Nazis did in World War II was absolutely incomparable to anything. And the other camp said, well, some kind of a analogous thing happened in Russia. right? It's a very different regime and very different circumstances, and let's say it like this: it was a very different genocide, but both cases were genocides, and cases of mass murder by the state, right? Industrialized mass murder, as you would say. And that second group said you can compare those, and the fight was, the other group said you can't compare things like this. And I've always been following the historians who are firmly in the camp who said you can compare these things, because I think if you can't compare things, then you, as I said, you can't apply history to your life. Anyway, I think when you do something like this, there's always people saying, you're comparing apples to oranges, and people are saying like these two things are so far apart that you can't compare them. But I think you can often. You can compare very different things because sometimes they have similar aspects. They might be completely different in other respects. So if you compare the pandemic to what happened in the interwar period in Germany to the Weimar Republic, there are huge differences, right? It was a very different political system. It fell apart, it failed, and a totalitarian regime took over, which is not happening right now. Right, so complete different. We live in a democracy now. It's a very different democracy. It's one that is specifically modeled so that what happened back then can't happen again, which is working to a large extent, I would say. But there are similarities. Some similarities, and I think a very important one that I've talked about this on the show before, but you gotta give me some leeway here today. I'm trying to recap, right? I'm trying to finish this subject, probably not forever, but for a good while. So that's why I'm recapping this. And I feel the common denominator is, and I don't actually have a term for this, which is weird. There must be a term in historic science. Maybe I was just asleep when we were talking about this, but to me, the common denominator is fear-driven decisions in society. And the ability of politicians to consciously or subconsciously, I'm not quite sure, might actually be different. I'm pretty sure with the Nazis it was very much consciously. I think in the pandemic, not so much. It's a very different dynamic all around, but it's very different, but I feel in my heart that it has this undercurrent that is similar, and I think is the key to understanding not only the situation we're in now and the situation back then, but generally human nature and maybe society a little bit better. Because I feel, and I think I talked about this before, I wrote blog posts about this before, possibly only in German. I've blog on fab.industries, which is my personal website. I've got a German and an English blog, and sometimes I write different content for the different markets, so to speak. But I think I talked about this in my German column several times. I've never understood what happened in the Weimar Republic completely. I understood it from an academic perspective, as somebody who studied it, who's read a lot about this, had discussions at university. But you come to a point where you study history, and your professor says, so the goal about studying history is you can't assume that with everything you know and your proclivities and your understanding of how life works, you can't just transplant that and say 100 years before what would have felt like to live there, because it was completely different circumstances. Life was very different, and you can't just transplant that. So if you want to understand the people that lived back then, you have to put yourself in their shoes. But every good history professor will say this immediately: this is often not possible, like not completely possible. You can only do like a best effort. And I always done this, and I've never understood. And I've talked to people who were there. My grandmother, who is over 100 now, she's 100 now. She turned 100 last year. And I've tried to talk to her about it, and I've talked to other people about this. And of course, in university, we looked at interviews with people that were there at the time, and I've kind of on on a very literary, like, on an academic level, I've understood what was going on back there, but I could not understand the people. You read what happened back then, and you're like, why didn't everybody immediately see what was going on? Like, why didn't they see that these guys were up to no good? Like, I mean, you study the interwar period in Germany, and Hitler tries to have a putsch and gets sent to jail on a very lenient sentence, and then he uses his jail time to write his book, where he lays out, his hate of Jews, and in relatively clear terms hints at what he would do if he was in power. And he's very clear that he thinks like certain people are not humans, and that you can basically deal with them, can basically shoot them like cattle, who cares? And he lays all of this out, and you read this and you're like, but then he comes out of jail and he starts in trouble again. People start following him. And you're like, why didn't the normal people, why didn't like the journalists, why didn't they understand? And then, there were people who understood. Some of them left the country. They saw what was coming. Other people tried to fight it and lost their lives. But generally the public didn't. And the public was swept up with this because, the Nazis came to power by popular vote. They used a democratic system that was not set up to encounter a force like this, and they used that system and got into power. And then, of course, they changed all the rules. All bets are off. But, people didn't see it coming. And you think, like, why didn't they see it coming? And what has happened to us in our societies in the last 2 years has shown me, I think I understand a lot better now what happened back then. And I think that the key factor is this fear. If people are afraid of something, you can get them to do certain things where they basically stop looking ahead. They stop looking clearly. They stop analyzing clearly the actual dangers. And, I think today, obviously, I think it's this virus pandemic. I think people are not clearly analyzing risk to them and to society. And back then it was the fear of others, right? The fear of, it was there was fascism in Italy, and this mirrored itself all over Europe, but it was very special in Germany, where you have to understand that Germany took a very long time to become a nation state, the last nation state in Europe by a long margin, and didn't have a culture for a long time. Like, what people call German culture really did not exist before even like the late 1700s. The late, maybe a bit earlier, maybe late 17th century or something. Like, before that, Germany was all these different kingdoms with all different cultures and stuff. And so Germans felt like when Bismarck gave them a nation state, they felt like finally we're there, we earned this, we're a strong nation, we're proud of our nation, like other nations as well. I mean, it was the era of the nation state, and finally Germany is there as well. And they lost that in World War I, right? It's kind of like the king gambled this all away, and they lost this, and this was kind of a fear and an inadequacy of the German national spirit, I would say, that Hitler and the Nazis took advantage of. But also a lot of fear, right? A lot of fear. The parallel in other countries, in Italy and in Spain is largely economic, right? There was a huge economic collapse at the time. And people out of jobs, and this industrial revolution had kind of fallen apart. And there was a lot of fear of the future, and I think they capitalized on that. And I feel like today it's again a different situation. There's nobody capitalizing on it, I would say. It's not a huge conspiracy or anything, not the silly stuff everybody talks about. Bill Gates and the fucking microchips. I don't even get it. I don't think there is there's a conspiracy, but there are the same forces at work, I feel. Largely a fear that people have. The inability of the press to deal with this fear. I think that's a huge factor today. That probably wasn't such a big factor back then, because the press, for a while largely capitalized on also what the Nazis were saying. So they didn't capitalize on the fear, they capitalized on the opposite pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I think the fear is the big factor, and that what that did, what I didn't see. I mean, I should have seen this kind of coming, really, because if you study politics and history, you know that fear is like basically the biggest motivator. If there's a war brewing, there's only two ways you can get young men to sign up to kill themselves in the army, right? One is national pride, but that only goes that far, and the other one is fear, right? And the army uses that every time. When I went, we talked recently on the show about the German conscription, right? The mandatory military service. And when I had my, what is it called? Is it, I think you'd call it the draft, right? When you go there and they assess you, obviously you can kind of decline. And by the time I did it, it was like really easy. You just had to decline. Then you have to do like a year of civil service, mandatory civil service, like, work in the hospital or whatever. Back in the day when my dad did it, you actually had to write, and you had to, like, they wouldn't accept it often, and it was a huge hassle. But to get you to sign up to the military thing, they would go like, yeah, but what if the Russians attack and then, they rape like your girlfriend or whatever? Like, that's literally what they said to me. Like, that's literally, this is the same arguments from like from the 1400s up to current day. So, you understand that, like, this kind of fear-driven thing is understandable. And also the mass movement that creates, right? That's also a big parallel to the interwar era. I mean, here, I talked about this on the show. It was too surprising to me, but in hindsight, it's kind of the same thing. You had people who were afraid of this virus because they hadn't, I think, largely ever looked into respiratory viruses in general. And they didn't understand well because, it doesn't really get taught that well in school. Right? People don't understand how viruses work. They get a cold, and they don't understand the difference between the common cold and influenza. They don't understand the difference between a viral infection and a bacterial infection. Right? Many people had to learn, like many intelligent people that just before that didn't care about this, didn't know that before the pandemic that you can't use antibiotics on viruses. So, people generally, this is a far off topic that didn't interest them. Suddenly this got important to their lives, and they were scared. And you had kind of this mass movement that is still going on of people latching on to things where scientists filtered through politicians tell them, okay, this will make it better, right? I mean, it wasn't, if you look at it, it starts with the mask mandates. The government says you'll have to wear a mask now, and everybody was right there. And there were actually people shouting down the people that were complaining, that were saying this doesn't make any sense, or I don't want to do this. So you had a very proactive, I mean, I'm talking from a German perspective here, but I've seen the same. I mean, we have the internet now. I've seen this play out with my UK Twitter bubble, right? With people in the US. You had this everywhere. And first it was the masks. Now it's the vaccines, right? We talked about this on the show. I'm by far a vaccine, an anti-vaxxer. I wouldn't even call myself a vaccine critic, right? But I think that I understand what a vaccine does a lot better than most people that are talking about this, including a lot of my colleagues in the press, because a lot of people seem to think that vaccines do certain things that they were never designed to do. And they even pretend that they were designed for it, right? People who say that vaccines were designed to inhibit the spread of like a disease that is as contagious as the one we are fighting here. I don't know where they got that idea from. I really don't. I mean, these days all bets are off. It's probably now in the Wikipedia article for vaccines because somebody put it in and everybody's just like, yeah. But if you look at sources like pre-2020, let's say, I mean, there were sources, I grant you that, especially the WHO said, I mean, they even claimed they've eradicated certain diseases with vaccines, which they haven't. I think measles, wasn't with the measles the first one? In the 80s, they said it had disappeared, and then it popped up again. I think the smallpox was another one. People, I don't think this was the WHO, but people claimed this for the plague, Yersinia pestis, which is total bullshit because if you look through medical history, that keeps propping up again and again. So I think, okay, people are always misinformed. That is also not a surprise, but like this what surprised me was this mass movement for people basically cheered the state taking away their civil rights because they were, or they are still, because they are afraid of getting infected with the virus. And they think that this taking away of civil rights is going to help. I think this effect is probably the strongest in Germany because Germans are just, I don't know if it's genetic. It's probably not genetic. It's probably cultural. They're culturally predisposed, especially, I've talked about these different kingdoms in Germany, right? But like Prussia was very influential because Bismarck was from Prussia, and Bismarck used the Prussian model when he founded the German Empire. We're talking the Second German Empire, technically. I always think it's the first because the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, I don't really feel that was a German empire, but I think technically that the second Reich, when Bismarck founded that, he founded that after the Prussian model, and the Prussian model got drilled into people's minds, and there's a lot of discipline and doing the right thing and following laws and that kind of thing. That's a very Prussian attitude that became to some extent the German attitude, right? So I'm from West Germany. I can't stand Bavarians. That's the cultural differences, right? So Southern Germany, Bavarians, we can't fucking stand them. We think they're idiots. All of them, no. But there's this rivalry, right? And I really can't stand the culture. But even if somebody who is a very much Prussian, my father's family is from Duisburg, which is the Rhineland, the Ruhr area, which became Prussian, 1800 something. And my mother's family is from Pomerania, which is even more, that is actually Prussia, pretty much. So I'm very Prussian, and also in my demeanor sometimes, I think, always trying to be on time and stuff like that. Even, okay, live streams of this podcast, I'm currently live streaming this on Twitch, of course, I know an exception that never works, so I'm not that Prussian. But I always, even though I'm kind of very much in that cultural thing, I always, the one thing I always liked about Bavarians, even though they have a horrible accent and I don't know, I can't stand a lot of what they do, but they're very rebellious. They have a very rebellious streak. which I always liked, which is very un-Prussian and so often considered un-German, I think. Because, Prussia is so much a stereotype. Like, not if you're outside of Germany, you think like Bavaria. Everybody who's never like been to Germany, they think like Lederhosen and Oktoberfest and beer all the time. Whereas for Germans, the Prussian idea is very much a stereotype. They're following the rules, right? Germans love following rules, which in this pandemic very much made us into the forefront of this kind of thing, I feel. I completely did not see this coming. This was completely surprising to me. A shock. I don't know. I should have probably seen that, but all right. And I talked about a lot of this. Of course, all this happened. And we talked about this on the show. I don't have to go into this. If you go to the show notes, Private Citizen Press, there are tags at the top. If you click on the coronavirus tag in this episode, you get a list of all the episodes I talked about. Some kind of coronavirus stuff, right? And it starts with the first measures, and later on I talk about the contact tracing app and how I think that's bullshit. And then we get into the privacy, like the infringement into our privacy rights that we had to endure because of this. In this pandemic, things happened that I thought would never be possible in Germany, because Germany is a very privacy-centric country, which is also due to the this basically aftermath of the Nazi rule. Where the state intruded into every aspect of a person's life. And we made very, very, very bad experiences with that. So, I can remember, this is like, we're doing Linux Outlaws, and I was talking to Dan about this. So this is like, 2008 or whatever, when Google Maps and Street View first, probably been around longer, like in the US and in the UK. But when it started taking off in Germany, there was a huge outcry, privacy-wise, which I don't understand. I never understood. To this day, I don't understand, where people were fighting tooth and nail about like these Google taking pictures of their houses, which in retrospect is just completely like ass backwards. And if you look at it from today's standpoint, you're like where are people's priorities? The thing is, German law has always been pretty much, there are exceptions to this, but generally, if you're on public ground, everything you can see if I'm on the road and there's a house, I can take a photo of that house. Anything I can see from the public road, I can take a photo of. If people don't want me to look into their yards, they can put a wall up, right? If they don't want me to look into their windows, they can put blinds on. So that was always the law and the understanding. And then Google just sends a car down the road doing that, automatically, and assembles it into an internet, basically a database where everybody can see every house. And people are like, oh my God, I don't like this anymore. And suddenly you had to, houses were blurred and all this kind of stuff. But, I never really understood that, but I shook that off as, okay, Germans are very privacy aware people. And that's just how it goes, right? That's just our culture. And I might not agree with everything, but, that's the way it is. And pandemic rolls around, the government goes, hey, okay, so that law where we can never come into your house? Like where the police can't come into your house unless you let them in or they have a warrant. Well, that's off the table because we need to check if, you're having illegal parties because virus. And I'm like, what? Like 10 years ago, you were up in arms because a private company took a photo of your house and put it on the internet. And now you're letting the government in? Like, what the hell? and not even the police. We're just talking the Ordnungsamt, which is like basically the, I don't know. Do people? I think I was asking this on the previous show. Does this exist outside? I think they're like the code enforcement probably in the US. You know, they're like these clowns who do a little bit dressed up like the police, but they're not allowed to do anything. Like, if anything happens, so if like they can't even arrest you. Basically, they have to call the police. I mean, they can do a citizen's arrest like everybody. Like, if you steal somebody's bag and then run away, they can just detain you and call the police. But they have to call the police for everything. So they don't have more rights than me. It's always hilarious because nowadays, because because of the pandemic, they got so many more people. You know, the Ordnungsamt, the order office, as we call it in Germany. They're now wearing like, I think they're wearing bulletproof vests. I think they're knife-proof vests, but they look like they're fucking on patrol in Kandahar, right? They don't wear fatigues. It's all like black and blue, but it's like they look like the police. They have like police emblems and everything, and they always have handcuffs, which they're not allowed to use. That's like me walking around with handcuffs. I mean, I can walk around with handcuffs, and I can do a citizen arrest if somebody runs away. But if I just go and handcuff a random guy on the street, like, they're gonna sue my ass. The police gonna come, and I'm gonna get fucking indicted for like arresting, for taking somebody's liberty away. So it's hilarious. Anyway, I never understood that. I never understood how that happened. Like how that twisted. And that is, I mean, the only thing I can understand is fear. It's people are so afraid that they said, okay, I would just want anything to be safe. And at first I thought it was just anything to make my life normal again, to make it go away. But we're now at a point where I think everybody realizes that, and this is like, I'm talking a year ago, like middle of last year, or let's say after the summer, when it all started kicking off again. Everybody, and even the last person must have understood that this is not going away from masks and vaccines and how many, whatever rights they're going to take away from us. That's not going to help with the pandemic going away. Like, it's not helping with the virus situation. But people still endorse that. So I thought at first, I think in like 2020 for a long time, if I look back, I thought, okay, people were like, I don't care about this. Let's just let it go away. If I have to wear a mask and if the police comes into my house, I don't care. But this will go away and then all is going to be normal again. But we now, I think, understand that that's not going to happen. And people still endorse these rules. So I feel like they need them to feel safe. Right? And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm so far removed from. I don't know if I would be very interested in. I always say, give me feedback to this. Private citizen or press feedback. Link up the top, contact link up the top. Please write me. I mean, we have a forum, email, whatever. I don't. If you say you don't want to get quoted on the show, I won't. But I'm just very interested in your thinking about this. Do you think, okay, how am I gonna put this? Sorry, hitting the microphone there. Also, I need more coffee. How am I going to put this? Do you think that? I mean, when I'm saying this, I'm thinking I'm trying to end this topic and I'm eliciting feedback. But I'm thinking if we, I'm gonna try to stop talking about this topic for a while. But I think if I'm gonna talk about feedback in the next few shows, that's okay. I hope that's good. But like, do you think that this that this fear that like how do you feel about that? Do you have that fear? Are people who are listening to me on the show Like, does everybody who does have that fear has already tuned out and thought, well, what this guy is saying is dangerous for all of us? Because I don't have that fear. I don't have, as far as I know, I haven't gotten this virus. Also, I got three vaccine shots now, but as far as I haven't been sick in the last 3 years. I haven't even had a cold, I think, as far as I can, It's kind of hard to say in the summer because I'm always very hay feverish. But certainly I don't think I've had this, at least not any serious symptoms. So I haven't had the experience, but like, I'm not afraid of it, right? Of course, I'm thinking, okay, if you get it and you get it seriously, like, that's shitty, and I would then be afraid, right? Just as I never was afraid of influenza, and I'm pretty sure I got influenza a few years ago, and when I had it, and I was lying in bed for like 5 days, and my wife wasn't there, and I was like, I can't eat, I can barely drink, there was a time when I thought I couldn't get from my bed to the toilet because I was so weak. And I was like, my wife isn't here, she can't help me. I think I need to call an ambulance. If this gets bad, if like the next time I try to go to the toilet and I can't, I'm going to call an ambulance because this is really bad. Right? I was afraid at that point. But like, I was never before, even though I know what influenza is and I know what it does to people, and I know that could happen, and I know that I could die from it. I was never really afraid of that, right? I was at, in the, I don't know, this is like the end of the 90s. I don't know, I must have like watched Outbreak or something, and then I read Hot Zone, which is obviously both a movie and a book about the Ebola outbreaks. Although Outbreak is fictionalized, Hot Zone is also fictionalized, but it is largely just a recounting of things that actually happened in Reston, Virginia, when they had a lab accident with, I think, Marburg virus, actually not Ebola. But I read about the Marburg accident, and that like really scared me when I read about that. But then I read more and more about it, and I just it's kind of like the more you read about the topics, like I was very afraid of flying for a long time, so I started researching planes and what can happen, and how likely it is and whatever. And the more you understand about it, at least for me, it's always like the more I understand about the topic, the less afraid I am, because I start to you start to assess the actual danger, right? And you realize, okay, the danger of actually getting an Ebola virus is tiny. And if you get it, then you're like, okay, 50-50 chance to die pretty much. This is, if you're very healthy, this is shit. I'm afraid now, right? But like, same in the plane, when I look out the window and like the engine is disintegrating, that's then the point where I would then start to get afraid. But I'm not afraid anymore of just flying in the plane because I don't know what's happening, because I'm, this the fear of losing control is basically why I was afraid of flying. I just don't have it that much. And I've realized I've thought a lot about fear in recent times, and I've talked it must have been a few months ago. I was in a restaurant eating lunch, and there was a really nice guy, and I was talking to him. I think he was kind of like as starved for human contact as I was. We were both in this restaurant, and when nobody else, so it was like also like in the pandemic, and everybody's afraid to go to hospitals, so restaurants right now, hospitals as well. And we were just talking, and we started talking about this topic as well, and fear, and I was talking about that. I think that my chance of dying on a motorcycle is much higher, and he was like, "What? You ride a motorcycle?" No, I would never do this. And he was like, basically, like really afraid of Like he would never ride a motorcycle because he sees he's seen motorcycle accidents. He says I'm driving a car and I see like what happens, how people treat bikers on the road, and it's just horrible. And I realized at that point that people obviously have a different, like, I don't know, a different way of dealing with danger and with fear. And I think if you are at a certain level where like things just scare you, you naturally, you wouldn't do things like riding a motorcycle, right? You wouldn't do scuba diving. You wouldn't go climb Mount Everest, for example. I mean, climbing Mount Everest is like, I don't know, I looked this up recently. I think I talked about this on the show as well. I mean, it's like a 3% of people who go there don't come back, so it's like relatively high. And these are all trained people, right? So, and I wouldn't like in my, I don't think I'd go climb Mount Everest, but if because basically for me I don't see the appeal pretty much. But if I saw the appeal, and I would start researching it, and then I would like train and whatever. I think I would do it if I really wanted to do it, right? I wouldn't let the fear stop me, I think. I might let the research stop me if I research it. I was like, okay, this is maybe a bit too dangerous, right? There are just certain things where I go like, I don't think this is smart. Like for example, scuba diving, right, is something where you can have an accident and you can easily die. But if you train for it, you've got people there, you know what you're doing, then the risk is very small. But if you go like apnoid diving, the thing where like people are just basically hold their breath for like 5 minutes and dive down 30 meters. Like if you fuck that up, you can be down there and then you run out of air and you're dead, right? Or, well, I mean, you have the option of surfacing really quickly, which will possibly kill you as well or make you really, really, really sick. So, there's certain things where I go like, I don't want to do that. Because I don't see for me it's like a risk. I always do like a risk assessment. Like, what's the appeal? I just like riding motorbikes, and I know there's a significant risk assessed to that. But then on the other hand, I'm not going on the track, right? So like some people do, because I'm like, I don't see the appeal on that. I don't think I'm good enough for that, and I think it's too dangerous. But if I felt like it would give me something, then that maybe was different. And I think there's a spectrum of people, right? I'm probably in the middle. I'm probably like, okay, I'm okay with taking certain risks if I think it's worth it. There's people who are very risk averse, I feel, and then there's people. I think there's people who I know people like that. I've never understood them, like who get the adrenaline rush, right? Something that really scares them. I mean, that's a well understood psychological phenomenon, so I understand it in an academic sense, but I've never experienced it, so I can't really understand. It's like, they're afraid, and I think the endorphins that get, then the endorphin hit you get when you basically survive gives them something. I don't have that. I tried bungee jumping once. I was just afraid. The whole way down, the whole way afterwards, I was just afraid. There was no endorphin. I got no pleasure from. I mean, I'm afraid of heights as well, but I got no pleasure of that at all. And I decided okay, I'm not one of these people. And then I was actually in Australia. My best friend's birthday, he did a skydive. And he's like, do you want to come skydiving with me? And I'm like, nope. No, I'm good. I'm like, no, I don't think that's going to give me anything except fear. And I don't want that. So I think my fear system, like, it's not like I'm like damaged and I can't feel fear. But like, I think one of the advantages I had with the pandemic is, of course, I had like researched viruses extensively because I got really interested in Ebola viruses. And then, you kind of, at some point I got interested in, there's this like thing on Star Trek. I think it's probably Next Generation where I think it's Crusher. She talks to, or is it Pulaski? I don't know. Some doctor, like, they talk about that they haven't cured the common cold yet. And I was like, why the fuck haven't we cured the common cold? And I went on a huge like Wikipedia bender and like read other things. And it's like, oh yeah, so it's all these kind of viruses and it's bacteria, and it's very interesting. Anyway, so I thought, there had a lot of information. But if I hadn't had that, I probably would have been afraid of the virus, and then I would have researched it, I think. And then I wouldn't have been, I don't know. Please tell me what you think about this, right? I really want to know. This interests me a lot. Like, how is this fear factor with this disease for you? I mean, viruses are they're perfect for this kind of fear thing because, they're perfect to be afraid of. They're invisible. You don't really understand when you get them, right? It's not like, okay, like, that's this fear people have from the transmission. And that's like, whenever you compare, like, I've said this on the show a lot, and I've talked to people, and I'm like, you're worrying about like your risk to die of this is this high, but actually your risk probably to die, you're probably going to die of a heart attack or a stroke, and that risk is much higher. And people always go like, yeah, but you can like prevent that. You can not smoke, and I can eat healthy and whatever. And I think people have the idea that with a lot of other diseases that they can like do something about it. And with the virus, you can't do something about it. And then you wear a mask, and it kind of gives you the illusion that you can do something. I think it's largely an illusion, but anyway. And I think that's why this fear factor is so big with viruses, because people are just like, it's an invisible killer. People don't really understand it. Like, viruses are really weird. If you like, viruses are just a piece of genetic material, they're a piece of genetic material in a lipid shell that goes into your body and gets your body to reproduce it. Like, it's really dumb. Well, it's also evolutionarily genius, which is why they've been around for millions of years, and you can't stop them. But that's all they basically. They're like, that's a computer virus. They're just a piece of code that replicates themselves for really no reason, because they're not getting anything of it. But then on the other hand, do mammals get something by I don't know. They just procreate in their own way, I guess. But they're like really weird, and I feel like that's a big factor for this whole thing. I think that's pretty much my recap. We've talked about the civil laws, like the laws that have been passed, the civil liberties we've lost, the privacy concerns, I mean, all over the place, not only in Germany but everywhere. It's like, but in Europe, no, not even in Europe. It's not even a GDPR thing. Handling patient data, or like tracking people when they come into your, like, patient data had to be like handled very, very carefully. Like, you couldn't just go and, we need to track everybody that goes into our company and when they leave and whatever. That was all a big no-no. Suddenly it's like, no, we have to do this. Like, doesn't matter where. Put all your data in here. You want to go to a restaurant? All your data now. We're tracking it. We're putting it in a database. Who fucking cares? We're going to do this now. Otherwise, we're all dead. Like, this huge shift. And basically what I just want to say to wind this all up is, and this is going to be like, we're going to have to be stoic about this, everybody. Take each other's hands. We're going to form a circle. We're going to be stoic about this, because I've looked at this now for like 2 years or longer. And, in the beginning I was saying fight the new normal. I think we're fucked. I think this is never, first of all, just from a general legislation analysis, political science background, laws like this are not changed back. It's extremely rare that something like this happens, right? So the data retention laws getting repealed, something like this is extremely rare. And, the upload filters now that the new German government wants to maybe scrap, something like this is extremely rare. And it really never happens, I think, with law and order kind of legislation. Because politicians never give up power, ever. No politician does that. That is that goes against all instincts any politician has. And that doesn't matter in what kind of system they're a politician. Doesn't matter if they're in the Communist Party of China or in the German democratically elected Bundestag. They don't do that. So I don't think that's going away. Maybe if there was a huge outcry in society against it, we would have a small chance, but there's not. Society generally, I feel, has accepted this, and even if they're not, even if it's not the majority that has accepted it, it looks like the majority, right? Because the way consensus is created, works through kind of opinion amplifiers, generally the press influencers these days. And they have decided that this is what we want to have. And anybody who does, there's still protests in Germany pretty much every day, for example, against this, and in other countries. But these people all get put, we talked about this before. In our society, we know everybody has to have categories, and if you say, okay, I don't want people to be force vaccinated, you're immediately anti-vaxxer, and you're a moron, and you're a flat earther, and you voted for Trump, and you're a Nazi in Germany, immediately a Nazi, and literally, this is literally what happened, right? When the whole pandemic laws were voted on in the Bundestag, there was a huge demonstration in front of the Bundestag. There were some neo-Nazis there. There were a hell of a lot of people who weren't neo-Nazis. And everybody who was there was like, everybody who was there was horrible. I wrote a column. I said, I understand the people are demonstrating there. And colleagues in the press called me out for siding with Nazis. And I said, that's a democratic right we have to protest when something like this happens. And you can't just go at any demonstration of any size, there's always going to be one neo-Nazi, right? You get 100,000 people together in Germany, there's going to be one idiot is going to be there. You can't just go, everybody there must be outcast from society and can never have a voice again because there was one shaved head guy with a swastika tattooed on his face there. That's kind of how it works. And this is why we can't, even if we wanted to, I don't think we can get any of this changed. I think, sadly, that ship has sailed. I think the liberties we've lost, the privacy we've lost, that's irreversible. Now, what I don't want to do on this show, so what I want to do going forward is not talk about news again when there is new laws until they're, unless they're very, very groundbreaking or very, very dangerous or threaten our society or whatever. But the general stuff, I think we can't change this. We have to accept this. Which doesn't mean, I want to point this out, this doesn't mean I've given up. And this doesn't mean I accept the new normal. And I will, whenever stuff comes up, I will I've not changed my mind, right? The fact that these civil liberties have been taken away from me, and are probably not coming back, doesn't mean I'm going to get used to that. Because I remember a time when we had those, right? I remember a time when you could go to a restaurant without having to put your fucking name and address down. I remember a time when in Germany we understood that you couldn't just, that the state, for whatever reason, couldn't just do medical procedures to somebody because society wanted that. I remember that time, and I will never let that go. Right? I remember a time when you could go out and you didn't have to wear a mask. In fact, where it was illegal in many places to wear a mask. So it doesn't mean that I've given up, that I've accepted the new normal, and I don't want you to. I mean, whatever you do, it's up to you, right? But I think we shouldn't. I think we should understand, especially, if you're listening to a show, and I'm doing a show about privacy, I want to get back, if I'd started this podcast and the pandemic hadn't happened, I would still have had a lot to complain, a lot of privacy issues that I want solved. And now it's even worse. So I'm not gonna, I will still complain about those issues, but I will also never let these kind of things go, right? I will never let the fact go that we now have a law in Germany where the authorities can come into your home because they think you are sick or you are doing you're having an illegal party, right? I've been brought up for the first, 34, 35 years of my life to understand that in our society, your health and whether you are sick or not is nobody's business but yourself and your doctors. And I still feel that way, and I'm not going to let that go. And I don't want anybody else to let that go. But I feel like belaboring this on the show again and again just didn't help anybody. So that's why I wanted to explain this. I wanted to, again, explain my thinking, without getting into a huge discussion how deadly I think this disease is. I think it's beside the point. Because I'm generally not a very idealistic person, but I think we should have some ideals in society. And I feel these days, even if this would have been Ebola, even if this would have been as contagious as SARS-CoV-2 and as deadly as Ebola, and half the people in Germany would have died by now, I still don't think we should have given up all civil liberties. Because in hindsight, it's even clearer because we've given them up for measures that didn't really work, I think. That have largely been, the protection people thought they were getting was largely an illusion. I think it becomes clearer and clearer that what epidemiologists that weren't listened to, when the German government... Same thing in the US. People listen to Fauci here. They listen to Drosten. People are virologists, not specialists for how diseases spread, but how they work in the body. They listen to those people, and there were a lot of epidemiologists who said something like this: you basically can't do anything about it. You can kind of, your vaccination does, decrease the spread, masks decrease the spread. But in the end, the only thing we can do is let this go through the population, and the people who will die will die. We can do our best to enforce our healthcare systems, to rescue as many people as we can. And that's just the way it goes. And that's basically the way these diseases have worked since time immemorial. And the only reason why there's less people dying of something like this now than in the Middle Ages is just we've improved medicine, right? And we've improved ways of helping you. But, even after 2 years of this disease, we basically have no new technology to fight viruses. There's something, some drugs are finally now on the horizon, but the vaccines are not new technology, right? They invented new ways of new vaccine technology to get there quicker, right? But all the drugs up till now that we had, remdesivir and stuff like that we had, we tried to develop with Ebola and stuff like that too, don't really work. Well, they work, but not largely as well as we would like, right? Because we don't have something like antibiotics for a viral disease, right? You get a virus, generally, if you're healthy, your immune system will cope with them, right? With that, and if your immune system doesn't cope, then you die of something, because even with other viruses, right? If you're severely immunodepressed and you get like a rhinovirus, you could probably die of that as well. I think, you just get it just destroys your cells, and then you get like bacteria infections, and you get organ failure, right? And then, or you get usually people get pneumonia, which is or lung organ failure basically, and that's been the same ever since, right? And we've tried to develop drugs, basically all antiviral drugs. What they do is they try to so because the virus gets into your body, if your immune system is not quick enough to to stomp on it, right? When it's there, it keeps replicating, and because you get into it's not really exponential, but like a near exponential thing where you got virus, it duplicates and duplicates again, and it gets more and more and more and more. And if your immune system can't stomp down on it, you get overwhelmed. And so these drugs usually try to stop the virus from replicating. And a vaccine, which is relatively old technology, but very reliable generally, kind of fake infects you and gives your immune system like a leg up, right? If you get the disease properly, then your immune system already knows what to do, right? It's like, this army is invading. We already know how to build the tanks. Whereas if you see the virus for the first time, your immune system basically has to research what a tank is and how to build it, and then it builds the tank. Whereas here we got the blueprints ready, get the steel, make the tanks. And if you use an antiviral drug, then it's basically you just airstrike the area and you kill it. I don't know if it's really what it does, but I think generally stuff like remdesivir, basically that's why they have hefty side effects. Well, unpleasant side effects. They're not life-threatening generally, but what they're a little bit like cancer chemotherapy drugs, right? They kind of nuke the abilities of your cell to replicate. And the more targeted you get them, you can make them so that they just stop a certain process in the cell that the virus hijacks to replicate, and then you just stop that on your whole body level for a bit, and then the virus can't replicate anymore, and then your immune system can clear up afterwards. But that's the stuff we have, and there's not really anything new, I feel. I mean, now there's actually stuff. There's this, isn't that this Merck drug which looks relatively looks like it could actually help us with this shit. But but so basically that's what happened. That's what we have. We have this virus. Really nothing new, really. I mean, even it's coronaviruses aren't new. This is like SARS-2. We had SARS-1 and MERS, which weren't as contagious and basic. But if you read the reports on SARS and MERS, the people were already on, people that know what they're doing. They were kind of know what they're doing, but they were tasked with this kind of civil defense stuff, like protecting us against epidemics and pandemics, they were like, this is really, really worrying. We managed to like contain it in those 2 cases, but it's any day now there's going to come another one and we can't contain that, which surprise is what happened. But it's like, so it wasn't even like, it's not like even an unforeseen thing. There've been books, like, there've been reports, there've been like the WHO, the German, I mean, that's why they changed the Infektionsschutzgesetz in 2001. Because, the first changes, because they were kind of not specifically like this coronavirus, but they were afraid that something like this could happen. Because, something like this has always happened in the past. There were always outbreaks, but they never like became a pandemic because we didn't have like planes, right? And people couldn't get from one country to the other in the time it took for them to still being infectious, right? They would start to travel somewhere and they would get sick and then they couldn't travel anymore and they stay there. And, so the whole thing couldn't spread fast enough. But we basically saw all this coming. But people still get so overwhelmed with the fear somehow that we're there. And I don't think we're gonna go back. I think we should still remember what's been lost and try to fight to get it back, but also be realistic about it. Which for me means, concentrating a lot of the energy that I'm doing on this podcast on other topics. Because to be honest, there's nothing new. Like, I look at the news, I look at like, what can I report? And it's like all the same thing. It's the magic incidence number that's been crap since the beginning of the pandemic, where even the press understood and was talking about the fact that this number is like basically very unscientific because it's based on how much you test. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like if you had a space program and you wanted to go to the moon, right? And you're like, is this dangerous? Can we get people up there, right? And then you do like a test rocket. And let's say you were worried about the radiation and it leaves the atmosphere and it comes back down and you're like, oh, this is severely irradiated. This would kill people. You shoot another rocket up and it's like, oh, this wasn't irradiated at all, right? And then you go like, okay, the chance is basically 50-50, right? And then you shoot another rocket up and it gets irradiated and you're like, oh, now the chance to die is like a third, and it gets worse. So we just stop testing. Or if you want actually people to scare from going to space, you can just shoot more rockets up and see. It's like, what kind of a database? I mean, this is a really stupid example, but I'm talking about this from the beginning, and it's dumb. So, but these numbers are still used to decide everything. Like, even the German government made a new law, said these incident numbers are really not like telling us anything. We need to go by hospitalization rate if we decide anything about like restrictions and the public healthcare system. And then they stopped and they went back to incidence rate. And you're like, this is an audio podcast. I'm live streaming this as well, a video on Twitch. All the information to that, by the way, if you want to ever watch that. Private citizen are pressed, but I'm face palming. It's just, and it's everything repeats. I was just like, okay, now we're now like at the end of last year, it's like, okay, now we get. I mean, it's not gonna go away, this whole thing, but now we're getting reasonable again. That's like Omicron. We get a new variant. Oh my God, everybody needs to be scared, right? And I look into this and I'm like, okay, let's research this. Okay, so even the WHO says, at that point where I started researching it was very early on. They were like, oh, it's probably more infectious, but people are less in danger. They get much milder variants of the disease, so it's much less dangerous to people. And all the vaccines are still working. But then for weeks and months, like, they didn't have any data, but the press was basically, what if the vaccines don't work? Oh my God, it's more contagious. Yeah, there's some milder, but we don't really know. We don't really know if it's what, and and then it just like looks more and more like the initial predictions were correct, but people are still like, oh my God. Oh, and it goes on, right? This week, I read an article about a German hospital where the headline was basically in it wasn't really in capital letters, but the headline was basically, oh my God, chaos. We don't know how many infections are in this hospital. You read the article and it's like, oh my God, it's like chaos and nobody knows. Nobody has any numbers. And then you read into it and you basically, I was like, how does that work? I mean, you get tested when you get in the hospital. Everybody gets fucking tested. So they should know exactly. But then the thing is, so they had started, I don't know, they had people who got sick in the hospital who weren't sick before. And they basically figured out that, these were healthy patients that got infected while they were in the hospital by other people who were positive, but who didn't really have any symptoms mostly, but otherwise they would have been isolated. So basically what was happening is they had an Omicron outbreak and a lot of people got infected, i.e. they were test positive, but they didn't have any serious symptoms. Nobody died. Nobody had to go to the ICU. Basically, the headline was, we don't know how many people in this hospital are infected. But the bottom line is, we don't know that because they don't look sick. And nothing's happening to them. So it's like, the whole story is like, oh my God, everybody's going to die. It's really bad. And then you read into it and it's like, no, actually, no. Actually, the opposite. Actually, you could have written that whole story with a lot of people getting infected, but hey, silver lining, nobody's actually, there's no serious outcome out of this as far as we can tell. It's like, I can't anymore. I can't, I'm a fucking journalist. This is my job. I can't fucking do this anymore. I know it's not a conspiracy, right? But there's if I read stories like this on a weekly, almost a daily basis, right? And I've done so for years. And it used to be tech. And it used to be people not understanding how, I don't know, somebody hacking into a network works. It used to be about Apple phones, whatever. Now it's about this. And I read this and it's like there's two possibilities. Either the person writing this is incredibly dumb or intelligent, but has absolutely no capacity for critical thinking at all, or it's a conspiracy, and they're all out to get us. And I don't think it's the second. I think the people they're just dumb. The journalists are dumb. The people reading it are dumb. I don't watch the news anymore because I can't, because I just wanna murder people. I can't. I can't. And then I'm like in a restaurant or whatever. I listen to the radio. The radio's on, and I hear the news, and I hear they're just reading out something, and it makes no sense. And people just accept it, and they move on. And I'm like, the thing he just said doesn't make no sense at all. He just literally contradicted himself. Or they say things like, I mean, we're 2 years into the pandemic, and professional people on the radio, like public broadcasting journalists, say things like, blah, 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 okay, North Rhine-Westphalia, the incidence rate doubled. Which doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean, I want to know, does that mean it doubled, people in intensive care beds in this hospital, whatever, doubled. You're like, what's that mean? Does that mean it went from 2 beds to 4? Or from 500 to 1,000? Which is a huge difference. It is, it's all over the place. I write this I write this weekly column for a newsletter in East Frisia, which is an area in the northeast of Germany, which is famously very ordinary. I love Frisians. They're great people. They're amazing. They're really cool. But it's very, I live in a big city in Western Germany, and I write tech column. But it's very underpopulated, right? There's very few people living there. It's a huge landscapes and very few people living there. My best friend actually lives right in the middle there, and I have contacts there, and I know people there. I know how they live, and it's really cool and interesting. And they have, so because I'm writing for this newspaper, I'm like, I should better, they have like this newsletter, free newsletter from the editor-in-chief. I'm like, yeah, I should probably read that. So I get that in my inbox every day. And I just like, they're very, 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 very concerned about the coronavirus situation. They're writing about that in the newsletter a lot. And the other week, they had the story that in all of East Frisia, which is relatively, I don't know how big is East Frisia. I'm going to look this up. So I don't lie. Not lying, but completely uninformed. So East Frisia, the total area is 3,142 square kilometers. And it has a population of 468,000 people. So the city I live in, Düsseldorf, has more than that. And it's a city. And this is like 3,000 square kilometers. And they had a story that they have one person in the whole geographic area in an ICU bed. And that was a scary story to them. And they were seriously like, this is a big story. This is like, I'm like, seriously, one person? The hospital my wife works in at the time had like 6 people in ICU beds. It's just one hospital in Düsseldorf. It's just like people just like this. It's just like they don't critically even if they just have 2 ICU beds, they just drive one of them to fucking Düsseldorf or whatever into you're just a very tiny area. There was another story, was 2 years into the pandemic, they had 130 people died of coronavirus in East Frisia. And I'm like, this is probably how many people this year in Düsseldorf died from falling in their home, and hitting their head on something. And it doesn't matter where you are. It's always the fear story. Instead of I'm actually living in an area where basically nobody fucking dies of this. Okay, there's also not that many people living there. But if you would say, okay, so if you take all of these regions and say it was basically the same population as Düsseldorf, in the same time, how many people have died in Düsseldorf? It must have been in the thousands, because East Frisia is their people are spread out, and they're northern Germans. Even if they meet, they don't talk to each other. Right? They don't even meet. They're very ornery and like to be on their own. And it's you could basically advertise that area if you want to be safe. Move to fucking East Frisia because you're in the middle of fucking nowhere and you never meet anybody. But it's it's all over. I don't know. I want to know. I really want to know. Is this the same where you are? Is this I talked to my in-laws who live also not in East Frisia, but they live in the middle of fucking nowhere in the Lüneburg Heath. And they're in the pandemic, they were relatively scared. I mean, they don't really go out and do anything anyway. They're just in the house, but they go for walks a lot in Lüneburg Heath. And they were telling us okay, so they go for a walk for 4 hours. Sometimes we meet another person and we actually go on the other side of the walking path or whatever. We try to keep on, and I'm like, I live in a fucking city. If I go out, there's people everywhere. I live next to Kölner Straße, which is the is one of the most populated areas of Düsseldorf. Like if I go out there people everywhere, and they're from fucking, most of them are from fucking Southern Europe. They're like, they don't fucking respect your personal space like you're in Northern Germany. And I'm like, why are you scared? You live in you don't go out. If you go out, you never fucking meet anybody because there's nobody living where you are. You have huge areas where you can just go walk for hours and never meet anybody. Like, you're in paradise, right? Why are you scared? They're like, we're scared. They didn't say we're scared, but you could, like, they were basically scared. I don't understand humans. And sometimes, I don't know, I ask myself if I'm the only one. But I should probably stop. I'm probably repeating myself endlessly, and I should wind this up. So I've basically have taken stock now of what I think is going on and how I feel about it. And I just don't see me reporting about this, at least not proactively. If something huge happens, of course, I'm going to talk about it. But if you still want coverage about this, and I've said this a lot, if you want to talk about, or if you want to send me links about what's going on where you are, we had people chiming in from Russia, from Australia in the past, the UK, of course, the US, all over the US, Canada. I'm very interested in this, and I always will, if listeners, that's the exception here, if listeners prompt me to talk about something, I will. Unless I don't, I exercise editorial control, all right? So sometimes I just think things are not a topic. And sometimes it's very personal. For example, one thing I never talked about is I had a listener sending me information about, I can't even remember what this was. Might have also been in Canada or the US. Something to do with like preachers and them saying something and then getting arrested and whatever. And that's just not my. You're on the wrong podcast for this. I don't like religion. I understand that these are issues, but the whole issue was about like them being a preacher, and that was the whole thing. And it wasn't about just like a person saying, expressing their political beliefs. It was all about them being and I just don't like. I don't think religions should exist. All right, I've said this before. So I'm the wrong person to talk about something like this. So sometimes I just do that. I just exercise editorial control. But it's just you gotta have to live with that. That's the way it goes. This is why I run the show. And that's my one prerogative for all the work I do or try to do. So, and I don't think reporting is gonna do us anything. I think we all know what's going on. I think if you're still listening to the show, you've heard me talk about this a lot. You know the issues. You know what's going on. You know the societal issues. You know the privacy issues. You know the civil rights issues. If there's new issues coming up, yes, by any means, tell me about it. I will talk about it. But I think for now we're good. We know what's going on. We know that people are crazy sometimes, and I don't think it's worth fighting it. And so that's my reasoning. While I'm gonna try to move on from this topic and kind of bury the the coronavirus coverage once again. The first time I did this, episode 27, I thought that was the first summer. I thought we were getting back to normalcy. I was obviously completely wrong. I don't think that's the case now. I think quite the contrary. But I think at this point it's not going to help us. We know what the issues are. If you want to convince somebody, you probably have the arguments for it. If you can, go for it. I think the this is kind of like what would the analogy be? That is like we're in this discussion. If you talk to somebody who's on the other side, we're basically, this is Verdun, right? We've been doing this for like 3 years. The landscape is completely destroyed, right? The social media landscape, you can't have a discussion anymore. Everything's flattened. All the trees, the houses are gone. It's all just mud now, and we're all sitting in the mud. And we've been doing this for like 2 years, 3 years, And there's no way forward, no way back. There's just no winning here, I feel. If something new comes up, I'm gonna try to talk about this again. And of course, if you have something, as always, privatecitizen.press at the top, the contact page that still doesn't have the forum on it because and it also has the Discord, which doesn't exist. I have to fix this page, but it has the secure contact form. It has my email address, has the disclaimer that I don't like people sending me fucking put me on email lists, but this doesn't apply to you. If you listen to the podcast, you can ignore this. The disclaimer on there is just for the marketing people that go to that page. But there's a link to the forum so every episode obviously has a feedback section. There's also a forum link on there. There's just forum.fab.industries. Let's see if this works. Let's see if I can move on from this. Let me know what you think. If you're like, no, we need this coverage, it's very important. Please let me know. Maybe I'm just wrong about this. This is mostly born out of me. It's getting really hard for me to cope with this shit. And, but it's just always the same bullshit. It's always the same bad arguments and people just don't want to actually look at facts or look at research or, actually, like even news articles, there's nothing in there which even like approaches the scientific explanation of what they're selling me. It's just like, science says this. No, it doesn't. I've looked it up a year ago. It doesn't, and it hasn't fucking changed. So I just don't see it anymore. I don't see the use in it anymore. Speaking of the feedback section, let's get into that. Let's talk about the feedback and how you can also send me some for this show. We have a producer who often writes us, Evgeny Kuznetsov, goes by Necros on the forum. As always, very thoughtful feedback. He writes from Moscow in Russia, obviously. Do I need to explain where Moscow is?
Goddamn Ruskies!
I really like his feedback. It's often very good. This is why it often gets quoted on the show. It's also, of course, on the forum. I put a link in there, but I'm going to read it to you now. Evgeny said he's talking about the last episode, 105, where I talked about something that was or is important to me, the difference between law and justice. And Evgeny says, a very much needed episode indeed. My compliments for laying it out straight and nice. I'm glad that worked. Sometimes I just don't know if I'm waffling anymore. Like today was probably horrible, but it's good that it works sometimes. He continues, you've mentioned a principle that is widely acknowledged and in Russia is usually formulated as a person's ignorance about the law doesn't indemnify that person of the liability for breaking the said law. You cited a German saying to the same extent and so the German saying is Unwissenheit schützt vor Strafe nicht. The fact that you don't know about the law doesn't protect you from being punished. You cited the German saying to the same extent, and I immediately remembered an argument that I can't quite remember the origin of. I read it somewhere, most certainly in some science fiction. Find the argument amusing, even if questionable, so I thought I'd share it. I think this is very good. It's not, I don't know if he's quoting it from memory. The whole thing sounds vaguely Douglas Adams-y to me. It sounds like it comes from Douglas Adams or from somebody who's influenced by Douglas Adams. It's a very Douglas Adams way of thinking. And he had this very, like, kind of almost like a way to packaging like not psychological, philosophical ideas and like these thought games, right? These things you talk about, if you talk about philosophy, you often have these thought examples, trolley problem, whatever, stuff like that. The cave thing, Plato's cave thing. And he had a very mainstream, well, not mainstream, but like very approachable way of putting these. So that is what reminds me of. Anyway, Yevgeny quotes this. If all people, or at least most of the people, were to obey the laws, the society would function the way that lawmakers intended. In a democracy, it is usually implied that the lawmaker's goal is the good of the people, I talked about this, and the laws are written to that extent, which is why obeying the laws is desirable. It's basically what you learn in school, all right? However, to anyone looking at any modern legal system, it is absolutely obvious that a layperson cannot possibly be expected to read and fully comprehend all the aspects of the laws relevant to the layperson's life. Even professional lawyers usually don't claim to be well versed in laws outside of their immediate area of expertise, be that criminal law, property law, inheritance law, or some other area. And at the same time, all those and multiple other laws apply to our layperson who is supposed to follow these laws in day-to-day life. To follow and obey some regulation, one needs to first comprehend that regulation, and the vastness of our legal systems makes it an impossible task for a layperson. It is therefore obvious that our legal systems are not suitable for following in day-to-day life and were likely not created for this intent at all. I mean, I know what he means by questionable. I mean, it's kind of like a it's like provocant. I'm trying to say something in German that doesn't work in English, which is not good. Provocatively, I think it's like provocatively put, right? I think our laws were intended to be followed. And I think that's a general idea, but like they just got too complicated. And they're very complicated. And there's often like, I mean, I don't know where you are, but I think if you think long enough, you can think of a case in your own legal system. I certainly can think of cases in the UK and of course in Germany where kind of, this kind of thing applies. A good example is in Germany, we have a thing called, it's not a law, it's a Verordnung, so it's like a step under law, for all intents and purposes. Let's call it a law. We have a law called the StVO, Straßenverkehrsordnung. It's very German, Straßenverkehrsordnung. It governs traffic on the road, right? What you're allowed to do, how to yield at a crossroads, how traffic lights work, all the different signs, all this. Now there's a sign that you see in Germany very often. That is a sign that says "Hier gilt die StVO." This traffic law, the StVO, is in effect here, and this sign is always on private property. So let's say you have a supermarket and they have a parking space, they'll put the sign up. And this sign is absolutely, completely idiotic. Because if you read the StVO, it says in there that this law, let's call it law for all intents and purposes, this law governs traffic on public roads. It only is in effect on public roads. It is not in effect on a private parking space. Now, you can say, because that is your, like, if I'm the supermarket chain, right? If I'm Edeka, I can say, this is my parking space. I allow you to park there. You park your car there, drive along there. And I can say the StVO is in effect here. Completely say that, because I could also say, it wouldn't be, I could say, I'll smash your car if you park in the wrong place. Although there are probably other legal issues, but you can say whatever you want at first. It's your parking space, right? But the problem is the StVO gets enforced by the police. And the police can only enforce the StVO because it says in that law that it only is enforceable on public roads. The police cannot enforce traffic law on private property. That would be your job as the guy who that belongs to. But you're not allowed to enforce any laws, right? You can't just as a private person go, you violated my law, I'm going to put you in jail. That's the job of the police, right? So it's like a conundrum, right? So the police cannot enforce it there, and you can't enforce it there either. So you can put up a sign, but the sign doesn't mean anything, which has been held up in several court cases where, in Germany, the StVO says, there's right of ways always to the right. If there's no traffic signs and you're at a crossroads, the guy coming from the right always has right of way. Everybody, the guy from the left, if a car comes from the left, you can go. If it comes from the right, you have to yield, right? And there were people who, saw that sign, STFO was in effect, and obeyed that rule, and then somebody didn't, and they had a crash. And the courts have, consistently said, well, yeah, true, but, since the STFO is not in effect and it can't be enforced, really, the sign is meaningless, and you basically have to negotiate with the other driver. So basically the rule is don't assume this law is in effect. Just don't drive into the other guy's car. And whenever I see the sign, it cracks me up. Cracks me up to no end. But there's something like this in every country, right? And this is a purely an outgrowth of people not understanding this law. I mean, it says in that very law, you can look it up, but nobody does. And people see other people putting up that sign. They think it's a good idea to put it up themselves. Or, there's other, I always have these traffic examples because I ride around, car a lot or on the road and whatever. There's many ways where people just don't understand the law. For example, in Germany, only the police is allowed to control the traffic. So let's say you're on a crossroads and the traffic light is broken and does weird things, and there's a guy standing in the middle of the crossroads directing traffic. If he's not a police officer in a police officer's uniform, he's not allowed to do that. There are a few examples where for example, the fire brigade, right? If a building burns and they block the road, they're allowed to do that. But generally, not only the police are allowed to direct traffic. You see a lot of people directing traffic in Germany all the time. Sometimes there's a big construction site, and there will be a guy who has a high-vis vest, and he even has things in his hands to direct traffic. If you follow that guy's direction and you produce a crash, you will be at fault. You are not allowed to follow that guy's direction because he was not obviously a police officer. A lot of people don't know that. Well, there's another thing. Let's just get into pet peeves of mine. So we have a thing on the German Autobahn that is called Rettungsgasse. So if there's a traffic jam, what you do is you drive to the side of your lane, and between the leftmost overtaking lane and whatever lane's right of that. So if there's 2 lanes in the middle of the two, if there's 3 lanes between the left lane and the middle lane, you leave basically a lane, a gap, right? Because for emergency vehicles to go through, or tow trucks or whatever. And that was kind of a rule. No, it was it wasn't a rule. It was a thing you were supposed to do. They put that in the traffic law now. And there's all these little people who think they're the sheriff of the town, whatever. There's people that have stickers on their car where they're oh, if there's a traffic jam, you have bei Stau Rettungsgasse lassen. And they tell you how to with a little diagram how to do that. But people don't understand. This is a pet peeve of mine. That this applies to a traffic jam. So that you're only supposed to do this when the traffic is completely stopped. Not when there's stop and go. Not when there's a traffic jam on the motorway, on the Autobahn, and there's 3 lanes, and they're all going at 40 kilometers per hour. Right? Normally you'd go 100, whatever. So there's a congestion. It looks like a traffic jam, but people are not stopped, and they leave this thing. And it's just you're not supposed to do that. It's completely idiotic because if everybody's going 40, the rescue vehicles are not going to go 100 through that. They're only going through that gap if all the traffic's completely stopped. It would be way too dangerous otherwise. Also, as long as you're still moving, people literally honked at me because I was going I do this a lot. I go in the middle of the lane as long as the traffic's moving because you're supposed to do that, right? And people apparently don't realize that as long as your car is moving, you can just if I still go 10 kilometers an hour, if I see the car in front of me stopping, I'm supposed to leave distance anyway to be safe, right? I can just use that space to drive to the site. And I always do that. And then I stop. And then the thing in the middle is there. But like people just don't understand. Like it's not only that they don't know the law. Sometimes they just don't understand the laws because everybody just does something and they don't agree. I don't know. Maybe I only have traffic laws examples. But there must be like, if you're a lawyer, there must be like hundreds of these things where people generally think. Oh, there's another one. There's an interesting. Lots of people in Germany think that it is a crime to insult a police officer. And there's a term that gets bandied about that's called Beamtenbeleidigung. So insulting an officer of the state, basically. That doesn't exist. There's no law for that. Now, if you call a policeman a fucking moron, the police gonna sue you. You're gonna get indicted. But that law is just insulting somebody, right? That's the same thing. Like, if you insult me, and you insult a police officer, it's literally before the law. It's exactly the same thing. The difference is normal people normally don't sue you, and the police always does because it's kind of important for them to be be respected, and it's kind of their thing to do that. But like there's this illusion that this law exists, which it doesn't. Like it's so weird. But there must be hundreds of other examples. It must be the same in every country. I'm thinking, like, because Yevgeny's from Russia, I'm thinking about, like, I've read a lot about Stalinism in recent years, and so I read a Stalin biography that goes a lot into how he like ran the regime and how he built it up. And one of his big things, like, where it's not. Obviously, you can't like, scientifically prove if he did this on purpose, but he definitely used it. The laws in the Soviet Union were so complicated from the very beginning, like basically from the revolution. They made so complicated laws that nobody could oversee them all. And basically, Stalin used this to his advantage because he basically realized that he could, if he wanted somebody's head or he wanted to arrest somebody, you could just do that because it was almost impossible to not foul of any laws. I think it was Dzerzhinsky, the guy who founded the secret police, like the Cheka, which then became, I don't know what the Cheka became the U-Cheka, which became the NKVD thing, which eventually became the KGB. I think it was Dzerzhinsky who said, wasn't it point out a man to me and I can tell you what law he's broken? And that wasn't even like, they didn't, like, that was a very big thing in this book I was reading. And then I was also reading another book about how the Cheka worked. And they were always talking about how, like, there's like this belief that they made up all these, basically if they wanted to get rid of somebody, want to have him shot or whatever, they would make up crimes that person committed. But that's actually a lot of the time not how they did it. They just basically knew a lot about you, that they surveilled somebody, and they would immediately, like, they would very easily found some law that those guys were circumventing, because you just couldn't live like in the 50s, 60s, or even like in the war period in the 30s and the 40s. You couldn't live in the Soviet Union. You couldn't live a normal life without just breaking laws all over the place, because they just had very ridiculous laws and they were very complicated. And yeah, so I just thought of that when I thought of Yevgeny. So I think, yeah, that's just an unfortunate fact of our legal systems, that they are so complicated, which is also why lawyers make so much money, right? This is why becoming a lawyer is a very secure profession and not something I could ever do, because I find it incredibly boring. And also, they have to be very careful what they say, because when they say something, it's considered legal advice, and they have to just, if they talk as a lawyer in their capacity, they only can talk about things they really know. This is why when you ask a lawyer, like, okay, I want to do this. Is that illegal? Or like, should I do this? Can I do this? Like 9 times out of 10, you get the answer. It depends. Like I've when you're a journalist, you sometimes run into this. You write articles and like, can we publish it like this? And one thing I always I was very, very happy about when I worked for Heise. Heise has an in-house lawyer called Jörg Heidrich. He actually does their privacy podcast as well. He's on there a lot. He's a great guy. And I always very much respected him for being somebody you could go to, like a lawyer, right? You could actually ask, like, can I publish this article like this? And he would not say it depends, right? He wouldn't say, yeah, you're in the clear, because you basically can't do that because our laws are so complicated. But he would often say, look, we need to make a risk assessment here, right? And this is what could happen, and I always respected that. And there are not many lawyers like this. If you ever find a lawyer like that, hold on to them because they're very, very useful. Oftentimes you just go to a lawyer and they're just like, depends on what the judge is going to say if you get sued. Well, that really helps me to decide what I'm going to do now. So interesting problem. Anyway, if you have feedback, go to privatecitizen.press and please write in. I'm very interested. I mean, I'm not doing any episodes in February, so I'm collecting all of that feedback. I'm hoping we'll have some very interesting stuff to talk about afterwards. So consider this your homework. If you always, and I feel sometimes I get feedback where people are like, oh, this episode is like months ago, whatever. If you listen to this month later, like, write feedback. It doesn't have to be like people sometimes, it took so long for me to listen to this. I think Fadi sometimes like, oh, it took 2 days for me to listen to this episode. I'm like, Jesus, man. I mean, if you write about it 4 months later, I don't care. It's still valuable feedback. Like, I seldomly talk about things that are so like of the moment that they're out of date half a year later. So don't let that stop you. It's just something I wanted to point out. All right. And let's talk about what you can do if you actually want to keep this show going. Toss a coin to your podcaster. The way this works, I've decided a long time ago now, this is the value for value model, which means get the show for free, and that's it. But that alone, if everybody just listens to the show, that won't keep it going, because I am a almost starving freelance journalist, and I do this because I think this show is important. I need to make a little bit of money, and if some people pitch in, that's gonna help. So if you derive some value from this, think about what you can give back, and you can become a patron, which is like a monthly subscription thing, which starts at $1, or you can send one-off monetary contributions to via PayPal to producers at fab.industries. And I think this is the only way it works. I don't think you can do a show like this with advertisers. I'm way too critical of advertising in general. I don't think advertising is good for journalism. Fun fact: I thought the fact that this pandemic. So if you look at the journalism industry, it had a very interesting effect over these last few years, which. Especially online sites had much, much more traffic than they usually had. So they had a huge traffic increase because people were at home. They wanted to know what was going on. So they were reading the news. But they largely couldn't monetize that. They were actually losing money, which, and also lost me money, because that's when they stop giving work to freelancers. But, because even though there were a lot more eyes on the content, because of brand safety and such, largely the advertisers didn't want their ads to appear next to this content, which was being read a lot. So, you'd write about the pandemic, you'd get a lot of views, but you wouldn't be able to monetize this very well. And I thought that's generally, isn't that a good thing, right? Wouldn't that start moving journalism in the right? No. Wouldn't that incentivize them to write other stuff? Or, stop the fear mongering? Apparently it didn't. I don't know. So, I don't think advertising is the way to finance journalism. I strongly believe, and I have for a while, that the only way you can do this correctly is if your as journalism only works if you are primarily accountable to your readers, listeners, viewers. And I think the only way to do this is by them supporting you directly. I'm trying to prove this. So help me out here, won't you? So that's it for the preaching part. Now let's give credit to everybody who's helping me out, who brought this show to life. Thanks to Georges, Steve Hose, Butterbeans, Jonathan M. Heavy, Michael Mal Jensen, Dave, Michael Small, One Eye 11G, Rodane the Insane, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Jackie Plage, Philipp Klostermann, IKN, Vlad, Bennett Piata, Tobias, Sandman616, Kai Sears, Mode 7, Joe Poser, Fadi Mansour, Dirk Didi, Rizel, Avis, David Potter, Mika, Mr. Amish, Cam, Dave Amrish, Ricky M, Barry Williams, Jonathan, RJ Tracy, Rick Bragg, Captain Egghead, Robert Forster, Super User, Astral C, D, No Reply, Ewan Curry, John Chandler, Robin Liebe, and Zach. And also thanks to my Twitch subscribers, since I'm streaming this live on Twitch, as usual, Stardew Lisa, Mike the Dane, Jonathan MH, _com, Indie Gamiacs, Redeemer RF, Sandman616, Bacon the Pork, Mode 7 is unavailable, Nomt771, Water News XYZ, and MTE Sauro. And I also have to thank Bytemark at bytemark.co.uk, a British cloud hosting company who provides me for free, pro bono, with the service I use to bring you these audio files and the bandwidth, and I couldn't pay for that. So I am in the debt. So thanks to Bytemark. And with that, I'm running away, hoping to never talk about coronavirus ever again, which is not going to happen. But, gotta have hope. Watch this Deep Space Nine episode the other day. What did Garak say? I always hope for the best, but unfortunately experience has taught me to expect the worst. So the lovely theme song to the show is called Acoustic Roots by Raoul Kabazali, and I'm going to play us out with the song called Seven Falls by Hara Noda. This is obviously it's more jazz. I licensed this music from and the bumper sounds from Epidemic Sound, and they have a lot of good jazz, and I'm into jazz lately. I love jazz. I've been getting into jazz a lot. Basically from watching Bosch has given me an appreciation to jazz. And they have good jazz, and there's some good stuff. So if you have Spotify, I can actually recommend this, the Epidemic Jazz playlist, which is, all Epidemic Sound licensed stuff, which I use when I stream sometimes as background music. And Hara Noda features in that a lot. I actually don't know. It could also be a band. I have no idea if that's a name or whatever. So Hara Noda is also in a lot of other, not Epidemic Sound related. So, uncoupled from the licensing, they are in a lot of other jazz playlists on Spotify where they have some good jazz players. Anyway, it's amazing music. So this is called Seven Falls. I see you next week. As I said, won't be doing any shows in February, but I'll try to bring you one or two before that. And stay stoic, everybody. And if that doesn't help, aim to misbehave. What a lovely song, isn't it? And as you can see, we're going to rate Khalifa in a second, who's probably playing Divinity with Jonathan. I think Jonathan's going to play Tarkov afterwards. And I think Khalifa is going to raid him then, so we can stay aboard all along. And I gotta run, finish this podcast. I'm gonna probably stay in chat there, and I'm gonna I have a new tattoo, and it's itching like hell. I need to fucking cream this. I've got the foil is off now for a few days, and it's coming along nicely, but it's itching like fuck. So I'm gonna do that and say hello to Khalifa. And I hopefully see you tomorrow when I will build it's up there. I can't get to it right now. It's the Blue Bricks water mill. I'm going to start building that. It's going to take me longer than one afternoon. I think it's like 2,400 parts or something. It's massive. It's going to take me ages. And I probably don't have enough space on this fucking desk. But I'm going to try. Anyway, say hello to Lifa. See you hopefully tomorrow. And probably next Wednesday for another show. Maybe before that I'll record another one. I have no idea. See you soon. See you soon. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it a lot.